It's almost second nature now, isn't it? You just click agree, you trust things are,
Yeah.
well, basically okay online. Super convenient for sure. But there's always that little nagging feeling, right? That maybe all this data we're putting out there makes us just a bit exposed.
Yeah, that feeling is definitely understandable. And when you look at the sheer amount of info we give away, this report we're looking at today, top 10 data breaches that shock the world, it really highlights how often that trust gets pushed. Sometimes, it gets completely broken.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, we've gone through this pretty eye-opening report. We're not just going to rehash the scary headlines, though. The idea is to pull out the really important stuff, the lessons learned, maybe some surprising details, so you can have a better handle on the risks and, well, how companies are actually dealing with our data, or sometimes how they're not.
Exactly. Think of it like this. We're boiling down these huge breaches covering about 10 years, from 2013 up to 2024, across all sorts of industries to get to the core insights, the so what behind it all. It really shows that even with everyone trying harder on cybersecurity, these attacks, well, they keep happening.
Okay, so where should we start? The report kicks off with a big one.
It does. Yahoo, back in 2013, a real giant.
And the thing about Yahoo that just jumps out is how the story changed over time. First, it was, what, a billion accounts?
Yeah, initially reported as 1 billion compromised, which is already massive.
Massive. But then it turned out to be
3 billion, all of them, every single Yahoo user. It's kind of mind-boggling.
3 billion. Okay, so what data are we talking about? What actually got exposed?
Well, the report lists things like names, phone numbers, email addresses, birthdays, also those security questions and answers, the
Right.
ones.
The ones you can never remember.
Yeah, exactly. But importantly, the report does say that clear text passwords like easily readable ones and financial info, that stuff wasn't exposed.
Okay, that's something. But the fact that it took them years to figure out the full scale, that's worrying.
It really is. It points to maybe a big blind spot in how they were monitoring things, and you have to wonder how many other companies might have similar issues, even now.
And the financial hit was serious too, right? Didn't it affect the Verizon sale?
It did, big time. $350 million off the sale price. That really shows the long-term financial damage these things can cause, way beyond just cleaning up the mess initially.
So Yahoo notified users, beefed up security, the
Yeah.
usual response. But the big lesson here seems to be the sheer scale and the lasting financial and reputational cost.
Absolutely. It's a perfect example how a major breach isn't just a short-term crisis. It can fundamentally change a company's value years later.
Okay, moving on from Yahoo. The report brings up something quite different next. Aadhaar in India, 2018.
Right, Aadhaar. And this is huge because it's a national ID database. We're talking about 1.1 billion Indian citizens potentially affected.
Wow, from a tech company to a national database. That scale is just immense. Does this suggest that centralizing data like this makes the target, well, bigger and the potential impact way more widespread?
It definitely raises that question. The report mentions names, addresses, phone numbers, emails, demographic data for over 1 billion people was supposedly leaked. And the really alarming part, there were claims this data was being sold online for just a few pounds, like 6 quid or something.
£6. For that kind of sensitive national ID data, that's deeply unsettling.
It is. It makes you question the security around these huge centralized identity systems. Now, the report says biometric data, fingerprints, eye scans apparently wasn't accessed.
Okay, but still.
But still, even just the demographic info for that many people being out there is a massive concern. There was a lot of criticism directed at the UIDAI, the authority managing Aadhaar.
And how did they respond?
Well, they kind of pushed back, saying only a small amount of demographic data was accessible, not the core stuff. And they promised, security improvements and an investigation.
So the takeaway from Aadhaar is really about the inherent dangers of putting a whole nation's ID info in one giant digital basket.
Precisely. Even if the most sensitive biometric data was safe, the potential for misuse of the other information is huge. It just highlights the enormous responsibility and the huge security challenge of managing these national-level databases.
Right. Okay, let's shift back to the corporate world, but maybe a different corner of it. LinkedIn, 2021, professional networking.
Yep, LinkedIn. This one involved data from about 700 million users being put up for sale. That's, almost 90% of their user base at the time? Huge.
Almost everybody on the platform. Now, LinkedIn said this was data scraping. Can you unpack that? What's the difference between scraping and a breach, and why does it still matter?
Sure. So LinkedIn's point was that hackers didn't break into their secure servers. Instead, someone systematically collected or scraped information that was already publicly visible on user profiles.
Ah, okay, so stuff people chose to share anyway.
Exactly. Things like email addresses, names, phone numbers, other profile details. But the scale is the key here. Even if it's public info, gathering 700 million records together creates this massive, valuable data set for people with bad intentions.
I see. So even though passwords and financial data weren't involved, just having all that public profile info collected in one place is risky.
Absolutely. Think about it, that data can be used for super targeted spam, very convincing phishing attacks, maybe even identity theft attempts down the line. Passwords weren't leaked, reportedly, but the risk is still significant.
So the recommendations were the usual: be careful, change passwords just in case, watch your accounts.
Pretty much. It really underscores that even stuff we put out there publicly isn't totally harmless when collected at scale. It makes you think twice about how much detail you share, even on a professional site.
And sticking with social media giants, Facebook had a similar issue, also 2021.
Right, Facebook. Over 530 million users affected globally. And again, the cause was data scraping. This time, apparently, they exploited the contact importer feature.
It really does feel like these platforms are constantly trying to plug holes as fast as scrapers find them, like a game of whack-a-mole.
That's a good way to put it. This feature, meant to help you find friends, was basically turned against the platform to harvest names, contact info, emails, profile details, and just like LinkedIn, Facebook emphasized that, passwords and financial data weren't stolen. But still, 500 million records.
Yeah.
It's a huge amount of personal data.
And the response sounds familiar too. Update the feature, tell users to check privacy settings, recommend two-factor authentication, standard stuff.
Yeah, the standard playbook, which is helpful, of course, but you have to ask if it really gets at the root problem, how easily this supposedly public data can be gathered up and potentially weaponized.
It often feels like the burden shifts back to us, the users, to constantly manage settings and be vigilant.
It does often end up that way. These incidents really push for platforms to think about privacy right from the design stage and to constantly fight these scraping techniques.
Okay, let's change industries. The report covers Marriott, the hotel chain. That breach was discovered in 2018, right?
Yes, Marriott in 2018, affecting up to 500 million guests. But what's really striking here is the timeline.
The timeline.
Yeah, the breach wasn't new in 2018. It actually started way back in 2014 within the Starwood reservation system, which Marriott later acquired.
4 years. It went undetected for 4 years. That seems incredibly long.
It really does. It suggests there might have been some significant gaps in their security monitoring or detection systems over a long period, and the data involved was quite sensitive too.
What kind of data?
Names, addresses, phone numbers, passport numbers. And the report says in some cases, even payment card information. That's a much more dangerous mix than just profile info.
Passport numbers and payment cards.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that definitely raises the stakes. And the consequences for Marriott were pretty severe.
Oh, yeah. They face serious sanctions, including a hefty fine from the UK's Information Commissioner's Office, something like $23.8 million. Plus, obviously, the damage to their reputation.
It really drives home how critical, solid, regularly checked cybersecurity is, especially when you're handling that kind of sensitive travel and financial data.
Absolutely. Marriott is a clear case study on why robust security and, crucially, continuous monitoring and auditing aren't just nice-to-haves, they're essential. The long detection time is a major red flag.
Okay, brace yourself for the next one. Adult Friend Finder 2016. This one just seems baffling.
Uh-huh. It's pretty notorious.
Nope.
412 million member accounts exposed. And the most shocking part,
Passwords.
passwords stored in plain text. Lots of them. Just basic text, no encryption. That's Security 101 completely ignored.
Plain text passwords in 2016 for a site handling that kind of personal data. Wow.
It's genuinely alarming. Storing passwords without strong hashing or encryption is just inexcusable, especially given the extremely sensitive nature of that platform.
And wasn't there something about deleted accounts too?
Yes, that's another layer. The breach apparently included data from 15 million accounts that users had thought they deleted.
So even trying to remove your data didn't protect you if their underlying security was that bad. That's awful.
It really is. It shows that deletion doesn't always mean gone if the platform isn't handling data properly behind the scenes.
And their initial response was apparently just telling people to change their passwords. That feels incredibly weak given the circumstances.
Yeah, the report notes it was considered slow and insufficient. This breach really screams out the the massively increased responsibility platforms have when they deal with incredibly sensitive, personal, potentially embarrassing user data, security has to be absolutely paramount, and the response needs to be immediate and serious.
Okay, moving from that to MySpace. Remember MySpace?
Of course, a throwback.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had a bridge too, also revealed around 2016, hitting about 360 million accounts.
That's a good point. Even older platforms, maybe ones you haven't used in years, could still have your data sitting there.
Exactly. It highlights that legacy systems and databases on less active platforms are still valuable targets. They often hold a ton of old user information.
What got taken in the MySpace breach?
According to the report, it was things like hashed passwords, so scrambled but potentially crackable email addresses and usernames, and this data later showed up for sale on the dark web.
So vulnerabilities in older systems can still bite you.
Definitely. MySpace did invalidate the affected passwords and told users to change them, especially, and this is key, if they'd reuse that same password elsewhere.
That password reuse warning.
Yeah.
It comes up again and again, doesn't it?
It's probably the single most important piece of advice across almost all these breaches. Use unique, strong passwords everywhere. The MySpace case just reinforces how one breach on an old account can potentially unlock your newer, more important ones if you recycle passwords.
Okay, now for one that probably sent shivers down everyone's spine, Equifax in 2017.
Yeah, Equifax was a huge one, 147 million people, and the data, incredibly sensitive. We're talking social security numbers.
That's the crown jewel for identity thieves, isn't it?
Pretty much. Addresses, birth dates, social security numbers, and the report mentions sometimes credit card numbers and driver's license numbers too. This is the kind of data that can cause serious long-term harm.
And how did it happen? Was it super sophisticated?
Actually, no. It was reportedly down to exploiting a known vulnerability in a web application, a flaw they knew about but hadn't patched yet.
Ouch. That really highlights the importance of just keeping systems up to date. Basic maintenance.
Critical importance. It revealed significant weaknesses in their security protocols. The consequences were massive, huge settlements with the FTC, CFPB, various states, totaling up to $425 million for things like free credit monitoring and compensation.
It just shows the massive fallout when core identity information like SSNs gets compromised. Rebuilding trust after something like that must be incredibly difficult.
Immense. Equifax really drove home the potential impact and the huge responsibility organizations have, not just to prevent breaches, but to really help people affected afterwards. It's a long road back.
Okay, slightly different tone for the next one, maybe. Canva, the design platform, in 2019.
Right, Canva. Over 137 million accounts affected. Data accessed included hashed passwords, names, emails, usernames, so definitely serious.
But the report suggests their response was better, more proactive.
That seems to be the key difference highlighted. Canva apparently acted quickly and transparently. They worked with law enforcement, like the FBI, they reset passwords immediately, secured their systems, and they did something interesting.
What was that?
They offered affected users a year's free subscription to 1Password, a password manager.
Well, that's actually really practical. Instead of just saying, use better passwords, they gave people a tool to do it.
Exactly. It feels like a more concrete step to actually help users improve their security posture after the breach. It shows the value of clear communication, a fast response, and actually empowering users. A good example of trying to handle a bad situation well.
Okay, last one on the list, Capital One, also in 2019. About 106 million people in the U.S. and Canada. This one had a twist, didn't it?
It did. The alleged perpetrator wasn't some external hacking group, but reportedly a former employee of Amazon Web Services who provided cloud services to Capital One.
An insider threat. Or at least someone with inside knowledge.
Sort of. They apparently exploited a misconfigured web application firewall, basically, a security setting that wasn't set up correctly. This allowed access to a lot of sensitive data.
What kind of data are we talking about here?
Names, addresses, birth dates, credit scores, crucially, social security numbers again, and bank account details for some customers. Really sensitive financial and personal info.
That's worrying. Was the data actually used for fraud?
The report notes that, at the time, there wasn't evidence it had been used fraudulently on a large scale, and Capital One moved quickly to notify authorities, which actually led to the hacker's arrest.
So, a somewhat positive outcome in that regard. And they did the usual response, too. Security upgrades, credit monitoring.
Yes, improved safeguards, free identity protection, and credit monitoring for those affected. But the key lesson here is really about the vulnerability of misconfiguration and the potential for insider knowledge, even if not a direct employee, to cause significant damage.
It shows security isn't just about building walls against outsiders, but also making sure everything inside is configured correctly and monitored properly.
Precisely. Proper setup, rigorous oversight of tools, and considering threats from those with privileged access or knowledge are absolutely critical.
So looking back across all 10,
Yeah.
wow. It's clear that data breaches are just this constant evolving danger. They hit all sorts of organizations and affect, ordinary people in really significant ways.
Definitely. And we saw so many different methods, from exploiting unpatched flaws to data scraping to configuration errors to, well, just terrible basic security like plain text passwords.
And some themes just keep popping up, don't they?
Absolutely. Number one, passwords. Strong ones, unique ones, maybe using a password manager. That's fundamental.
Right. And the risk of data scraping, even for public info.
Yeah, that's a big one. Also, the absolute need for companies to have strong, up-to-date cybersecurity. It's not optional.
And finally, how the company responds after a breach seems to make a huge difference, both in limiting the damage and in potentially rebuilding trust.
Exactly. Transparency, speed, and actual helpful actions like Canva offering the password manager seem to be key.
Thinking about all this, it really makes you pause and consider your own digital life, doesn't it? All the services you use, how much you trust them. I wonder, for you listening, which of these breaches felt the most, I don't know, surprising, or maybe the most concerning?
Yeah.
It's interesting to reflect on why.
Yeah, and it leads to a bigger question, doesn't it? With cyber attacks getting more sophisticated all the time and just the sheer volume of data we create constantly growing, do we need a fundamental shift in how we even think about protecting personal information? Are the ways we're doing it now really going to hold up in the long run? It's definitely something worth pondering.